I hope you'll help me welcome Jenny Quiner from Dogpatch Urban Gardens in Des Moines. And Jenny's been farming for a long time, for a decade here, and using tunnels in a lot of different ways. And I thought it would be really great to tap into Jenny's knowledge about how she has used tunnels in many different ways and learn lessons from her past decade of farming. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, everyone, for having me. So I'm going to talk about how I've used tunnels in the past, and I'm going to focus more on the non-growing side because like half the things I put in here, Lewis already addressed. So I'm going to kind of like go over those kind of quickly because I use my tunnels for more than just growing. And so that's what I'm going to dive into today. Get my buttons right here. So DUG stands for Dogpatch Urban Gardens. Let me give you just a little bit of history of where I've been, where I am now. So Dogpatch Urban Gardens was an urban farm in Des Moines. So as I'm talking today, keep in mind that I was in an urban spot. So events were a big part of my business because I was in a highly populated area. So, consider where you're located and how that can fit into your farm. When I started roughly 10 years ago, the focus was on salad greens, quick turn crops, high profitability crops, and that's kind of where I hung my hat. I never grew cabbage, kohlrabi, some of the, I say, less profitable crops. Over the years, our farm property evolved, so we took on more agritourism. So we had an on-site Airbnb, we had a farm stand so people would come to us and shop. We added a commercial kitchen to our farm stand, so I made products, elderberry syrup, herb salts, all those value-added products as well. And then we created this line of salad dressings, which have really done great for us. We're in over 100 Hy-Vee stores. We have distribution in the Twin Cities. So the business, which started with a farm in mind, really changed over the years, and we continue to change. Recently, I sold our main property, which had the Airbnb and our farm stand. We still own the greenhouses, which we're looking to sell, and we may actually have someone that is leasing them for next season. So my business is changing. The brand Dogpatch is still alive. I'm still having the salad dressings in operation. I'm doing more homesteading and content creating. But frankly, I want more time with my family. Long story short. Okay, so big picture. What were the most profitable uses of my tunnels? And this is based on data, money. Number one was our garden center. So 2 years ago, we went full-on garden center, which was open April to mid to late June. And that's where we saw the most money coming into our business. So the number one seller were annuals, more like bedding plants, petunia, cali, coleus, sweet potatoes, those sorts of things. Gallon perennials, especially native plants, sold really well for us. And then organic vegetable plants. That was a big thing for us as we were an organic garden center. We weren't certified, but that was kind of what differentiated us from others in the area. And then events also did really well for us. Farm to table dinners. We hosted one wedding. That was it. I didn't enjoy that. We do an event called Flannel Fest. I'll get into that more. And then we hosted concerts. And then finally, crops. So you can see our order. We kind of saw the writing on the wall that crops are a big part of were a big part of our business. They were very labor intensive and we were not making as much money on them. So we shifted the way our farm moved. But you can see the crops that made us the most. Winter spinach, we saw high demand for that. Early spring greens, early season tomatoes and cut flowers. Okay, so starting off, we had one high tunnel on the property. These are the quick specs. We got it through the NRCS with the EQIP grant. It was 72 by 30. We work with tunnel vision hoops for all of our large hoops. Todd is one of the owners. He's great. He came out to our property, helped us install it. Highly recommend him. Double poly blower fan. You can see the rest. We worked with Practical Farmers of Iowa and did like a barn raising. So a bunch of farmers came out because we'd never done this before and frankly, we didn't know what we were doing. So a bunch of farmers came out, PFI hosted the event, and we were able to put our tunnel up in about 3 days. And Todd from Tunnel Vision drove from Ohio with all of our product. So he helped us build it and we didn't have to pay for shipping. So it was fantastic and it's unheated. So key ways that we use the high tunnel first, in-season planting. Kind of our rhythm was spring greens. And I used to really try to push to get them in the ground early February. And then over the years, I realized it's like you're pushing hard to get them in the ground early, but they still don't grow that fast. So each year I started planting them later and later, and then it's less covering and micromanaging in the cold months. So I've kind of found the sweet spot of like early March for my planting of greens. Then summer tomatoes were our best summer crop. And I think I did summer tomatoes 4 years in a row without any disease issue. But then I started to get paranoid because you're like, you're supposed to rotate. So then I started to add in maybe like a buckwheat, or we did some cut flowers as well instead of the tomatoes. And then fall greens, heavy on spinach. Here is my intercropping. You can kind of see it. Sorry, this is wobbly. But we had spinach. We just stirrup-hoed out a middle row and then put in the tomato plants to help them get established while we could still cut on the greens. Okay, so I have a lot of tips, and like I said, I'm going to kind of go over these a little quick just because Lewis talked about a lot of them. But for us, I always expected expected pests, and then always had a game plan ahead of time. And if you don't have pests, wonderful, right? But how often does that really happen? So I worked with a company called Plant Products, and they sell biologicals, and they're mostly like the Bioworks company. I had a rep, her name was Rachel, she's no longer there, but I would talk to her each winter and say, these are the pests I usually see, this is when I usually see them. She'd get me set up on a schedule. So every few weeks, I'd just get a little cooler full of beneficials. I can't tell you all the names of them, they're all scientific. She helped me get on a plan. So that is something worth looking into, especially if you're going organic. Have a plan ahead. If I didn't have any pests, I'd reach out and say, hey, we don't need an order this week. Key thing with that, it's expensive and shipping's really expensive because they need to get it to you overnight and usually cold. So it adds up pretty quick. Test your soil. Lewis talked about that. And then also don't go overboard on manure. I feel like I knew what I was talking about because Lewis kind of said the same thing because of soil salt buildup. Biggest cash crop was the winter spinach. If we could have more tunnels of winter spinach here or in Des Moines, we had a demand for it. The problem was we'd harvest it, it wouldn't grow quick enough for the next following week and so on. So we couldn't grow enough winter spinach. Good problem to have. We use the paper pot transplanter for the spinach in order to get a jump start because spinach can, one, be hard to germinate. And so we would do it all in the greenhouse and then paper pot it in, so that you are guaranteed to have a lush bed of spinach. I had a love-hate relationship with the paper pot. It was one of the first things I sold, and I was happy to. When it works, it's great. When it doesn't work, it's just as much work. So, word to the wise, paper pot's not the magic tool. I did transplant most of my greens. When I started with the tunnel, I used quite a bit of landscape fabric, but as we had weed situation under control, I got away from it, especially when we wanted to interplant crops. So if I had Salanova in landscape fabric, I couldn't then put my tomatoes in there with it. So over the years, we got away from the fabric because we had the weed situation under control. And then monitor temps, we do that in all of our tunnels. Not so much the caterpillar tunnels, but greenhouses and high tunnel. I worked with Robert Arnold from Smart Farm Innovations. He's out of New York, and he's a tech guru. I still don't understand him half the time, but he gets the job done. So here's just a few pictures. I've always liked the one of it can be white and snowing, and you can have lush green crops on the inside. I believe what I was trying to get at here is just showing that we pulled our tomato crops while they were still producing so that we could get our spinach in the ground. And I found, to kind of answer your question, that this time of the year, this would have been mid-September, our tomato sales were dropping because, the customer enthusiasm was just kind of like, I'm over tomatoes, what's next? So that we could have rode tomatoes out longer, but we're all sick of them. And then we would just trellis them up, but I never lowered and leaned or did any of that, just because we knew we were pulling them out. So we weren't necessarily trying to get the most life out of them. There's an example of us doing flowers and more greens and everyone's favorite row cover. Okay, so then we transitioned our high tunnel into retail space, and this is where we saw more profitability. So we basically created the Dogpatch Garden Center, and so we used that exact same high tunnel then for retail. So we just flattened out all the soil, we put landscape fabric down, because if you're using it for retail, you have to think about it being customer friendly. We set up our walkways so that people could pull their carts through, because expect old women that can't fit tight spaces. So make sure you make it customer friendly. So this house was only organic fruit and veggie plants. So people would know that's where you would go if you were looking for that product from us. We wanted to have herbs in there, but we just ran out of space. So we put herbs elsewhere. I talked about the soil. So like I said, this was not heated. So I did have supplemental heat as backup, because the last thing you want is to have it all die. So this was the supplemental heater, and I'll show you about it on the next slide. We did not have benchtop heat, but that would have been an addition I would have liked to have. I think that would be very efficient for some supplemental heat and not having to run that heater. So this is the backup heater I use, and I got it at Knowles, and I worked my numbers and figured out this was the size that I needed in terms of BTU. It runs on diesel, and it's supposed to be fine to run in a high tunnel. We never had issues with exhaust or fumes or anything like that. And then I just hooked it up to an Inkbird thermometer. And so I think I would only have it kick in at like maybe 36 degrees and run till like 42. Something like that, just so we're not losing crops. And also this time of year, the plants that I had in there were more cold hardy. But this was a great option, just kind of security and insurance, so you don't lose a tunnel full of plants.
How many hours of use do you get out of those?
So he said, how many hours of use do you get out of it? I had one night that was relatively cold. I couldn't even tell you. I went through one thing of diesel. I think the limiting factor is how quickly it goes through the diesel. So I had one night where I had to refill the diesel. It got me through the night. But I think that was like the only major, so that doesn't fully answer your question. But I think it probably would get me 8 hours running. But with the Inkbird, it'll run and then turn off and then run and turn off. So having that thermostat is really nice because you don't want to just run it all night. And then we'd also use this heater for outdoor events too that we were hosting. When we did like our greenhouse concerts, we wouldn't use this because it did have that exhaust smell and it just was not the best. But outside, it did work. Okay, and then in our high tunnel, we also did events. So I'm just kind of going through each structure and the different ways we'd use it. So we'd do the farm to table dinners. Flannel Fest was in the high tunnel as well. Host field days, and then that one wedding. So this was like, I forgot, but this was the cover of a PFI magazine at one point. We hosted a field day. I don't even remember the topic, but there you go. We're in the tunnel. Okay, so farm stand to fork, that was what we called our farm to table dinners. So in this picture here, we actually set up outside the tunnel. So technically we're not in it, but you can still see it was a big backdrop to the dinner. We had a few that we hosted inside. That was not usually the plan to host in the high tunnel because usually it was in production, right? And so if you have crops in the ground, how are you going to navigate that? But if I recall, this was like a transitional time because if you look, it's kind of hard to tell, but there's actually no crops in these beds, but they are over here. So I think we were kind of planning ahead thinking we may host inside. And so we kind of planned our crop plan around that. But it was kind of tricky because you have these nice fluffy beds that you've been planting in, and then you're putting a table on the beds, and then you're having people sit on chairs sinking in. So we had to kind of shotgun put down landscape fabric, and I think we did like 3 levels of it just so that people weren't sinking into the soil. So, and then after this, if I'm trying to remember, I think now after this, we didn't end up planting more crops because that would be tricky too. Then you'd have to rework the soil because you've compacted and so on. So just something to think about there. I think we moved inside here because it was really windy. Because typically we host, it would have been out that door there. And when you have pretty flowers and so on, it can be kind of miserable in a windy event. And so I think that's why we moved inside. And then we also put shade cloth just in the rafters there, to help cut some of the heat too, because most of our dinners were during the summer. And all you got to do is serve people wine, and they have a great time no matter what. They all look happy, right? So, and to piggyback that, we didn't serve it, they brought their own. We never had a liquor license. Okay, so here's the one wedding we did. Once again, it wasn't in the tunnel, but the tunnel was kind of the backdrop for the event. And the people that got married were our neighbors, friends of ours, happy to do it for them. But like I said, it feels like a big pressure event that I don't want to host. If that's something that you are excited about, look into it, but it just wasn't for me. Even like, she was the easiest bride to work with, but I still got stressed because I didn't want to screw it up, It felt like a lot of pressure on me. And then of course, I forgot about this until now. We had well-to-do neighbors that thought they were helping, so they came and fertilized the lawn. But then another neighbor came and fertilized the lawn, so we were like dead grass for the event because everyone's trying to help for, the neighbors. It was fine, and it all went well, but
They can fix that in post.
I just, you like want it to look beautiful, and then it's like, oh goodness. But the minor details, they probably didn't even notice, but as the host, you see all that. And honestly, I don't even think we charged them. I think it was just like a nice thing we did for them. But good opportunity in terms of events. Okay, now let's kind of shift to a different type of tunnel that we use. Also have the caterpillar tunnels. And these are what I got them all at Farmer's Friend. I really enjoy working with them. So we had all the 100 by 14 foot Gothic, 4-inch bow spacing. I think they now have 16-foot widths, but I bought this a while ago. We had the lift kit, so we get a little more height, and also wind bracing. End walls was a struggle I always dealt with, and I just gave up. So last 3 seasons, we never used end walls. We tried like the zippers. I never had any luck, and it made me more frustrated. And I know now they actually sell like pre-made kits. I never tried it because I just found no end worked best for me. They all suck. So of the 3 types of tunnels, greenhouses, high tunnel, caterpillar tunnel, these are the most economical, but my least favorite to use, and you'll kind of find out why. We always installed overhead irrigation in these, and then I would use shade cloth if needed. And you can kind of just see our setup there.
How well do they deal with wind?
Not the best. How well do they deal with wind? So we had one tunnel that we lost, and I'll show you that later. Everything else did fine, but it's always nerve-wracking, So you've had issues.
We are in a high wind location and have 5 of these tunnels. They've seen 75 and stood up with no like concrete or anchoring other than like the rebar. But we did build solid end walls, and I think that those help them withstand the wind better. But they're routinely in like 335 and have seen 70, 75 with very minimal damage, honestly.
Mhm.
We have big, heavy sandbags.
You're always just like,
stick on the bottom.
yeah,
and we're
yeah.
always checking.
like, I hope this works.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, and I will say ours held up through the 2 crazy derechos, but then we lost one in something like kind of like a fluke thing that was not nearly as crazy. So it's just, and that's probably because we had like loose plastic or one little thing that got caught and then the whole structure was gone. So in terms of like best wind control, these are my least favorite. I feel a lot more comfortable with our high tunnel and greenhouse. So yes, if you're in a high wind area, keep that in mind. Because we're urban, we're more shaded by high winds, so it's more protected. We're not a wide open field. So you can see mostly greens were what we were growing. So sometimes when we'd shade individual beds because especially with our leafy greens, I don't really want them shaded the whole growth cycle because then they get really long and leggy. So if I use just individual shade after they're established for a few weeks, I would pull that off and I'd plant heat tolerant varieties so they'd be all right. Then we'd also use our frost protection. Now, keep in mind, because I don't have end walls, I realize it's going to get colder faster in there. So I could have used end walls to have better insulation, but once again, I never enjoyed end walls and they were just a huge pain in my butt. So I just said the heck with them. And just a few more pictures. As you can see, leafy greens were our main. We did have overhead irrigation, which we would run 3 to 4 times a day during the heat of the summer, because I would grow these in the summer which is not easy to do. So overhead very much helped. And then when we would pull crops, we would use silage tarps to fry it out, kind of like what Lewis was saying as well. And we had silage tarps that were fit to those exact dimensions. And so when we roll it up, we just store it like back there. So when we need it, it's there because it's heavy and they are not fun to lug around. So if you can have an efficient system with them, very helpful.
So you just rolled it on a roll and you left the roll on the ground?
Well, so we just like folded a few times so it was somewhat pretty and then just left it out of the way back there.
Is that one tarp?
That's one tarp. Okay. Yep. And it was, I think I got it from Farmer's Friend. We ended up cutting it to make it in the right size for this tunnel. But yeah, just one tarp. Because then hypothetically I could pull it, or with an employee it'd be real easy. Okay, so some tips, and I may have already talked about some of this. End walls are going to make you have a better structure. It's going to be more sound, it's going to be more solid, especially in wind. It's going to help with temperature control, and also you may have better pest control. Okay, so I do recommend end walls if you have a good solution for it. Like I said, I just didn't. Proper space between your tunnels. So in one of the first pictures, you could kind of see how we had them spaced. We probably put them a little bit too close together. Because what would happen, the big issue is in the winter, when the snow would slough off and then just sit between the tunnels. I think one big problem is you can lose the integrity of your bows and they can kind of break in on each other. So we never had that happen, but it's something to be aware of. Make sure you're giving yourself space between your tunnels.
What was your spacing?
Probably 4 feet. And so because we're urban, we didn't have a lot of land space. So there's that fine line of like, what can we get away with? We got away with it, but I wouldn't recommend it. We also, between the tunnels, we dug little trenches in our walkways to help with water flow because we wanted the water to come off the plastic and travel down the walkways and not come off the plastic and go back in on those exterior beds of the cat tunnels. We used overhead irrigation a lot, and I just bought the kits from Farmer's Friend. And like I said, I use that for the cooling of greens. I wouldn't use overhead on like your tomatoes or those types of crops, but for greens, it was great. Once again, soil buildup, same kind of practices as your high tunnel. Also expect pests. And then I've seen Farmer's Friend now you could make your cat tunnel kind of more like a high tunnel with roll-up sides, and you can add baseboards and so on. And I think that's a great idea. So something to kind of put on your radar too, to just make it more solid. So here's our tunnel that went awry. Somehow 3 were okay, this one was not. My assumption is we had an issue with the plastic, probably on the wiggle wire on the end, and the wind was able to just get up and rip the plastic off. The funny thing is like a neighbor down the block like took the plastic and like never gave it to us. Like he kind of stole it, but we were like, we don't care, we don't want it. So we never had to deal with the plastic because someone down the road just took it. So question real quick. Yeah, chicken wire was for rabbits. So rabbit and deer pressure were crazy for us, and we never really had a great solution for deer because this was a leased property, and so we didn't want to put permanent fencing. So what was cool with Farmer's Friend is they replaced any broken parts at 50% the cost. So I just had to give them pictures, and they're like, okay, tell us what you need, and we'll ship it to you. So if that does happen to you, they're happy to work with you. Okay, so this is like one of my favorite tools with caterpillar tunnels because cat tunnels are portable, and that's one big perk of them. And the hardest part was getting the rebar out of the ground. And so I discovered this, and it's golden. And it's just a lever that helps you pull the rebar out of the ground, makes your life a lot easier, saves your back too. Now, if you have a big tractor and you can just pop them up, great. But if you're doing it by hand, this pulsed rebar puller is a really slick tool. They're hard to find online. I think I told you this. I found the best option was Amazon. And it's about $125, but if you're moving tunnels a lot, it's great. Okay, and then we transitioned from in-ground with our tunnels to retail. So back to the garden center, we actually moved all of our tunnels. When they were in production, they were on our leased property. We moved them back to our main property. We never put plastic on them for the retail portion. It was only shade cloth. So we just went straight to the shade cloth, basically because we knew the garden center was going to be open like April to June, and so we weren't really worried about dealing with the plastic. And so we once again graded that whole property to make it customer friendly. I say old woman friendly. I'm just expecting an older clientele, and how can we make sure they can navigate it easily, and didn't set up overhead here, so we would just hand water all the plants. And we had 4 tunnels, and we just organized our plants by sun loving. So we had 2 sun loving tunnels, 1 shade tunnel, and then 1 native tunnel. And our 1 native tunnel sold out the fastest. And it was one of those, like, when they were gone, they were gone. We weren't planning like succession for the plants.
How many years did you have the shade cloth up without plastic? Because we made a shade tunnel like this and we're having a lot of trouble. The shade cloth stretches out.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And we're just not finding it lasts very long.
So she's asking how many years did we have the shade up? So we only had it up this year, so I can't really give you good feedback on that.
Stretched out so bad.
I didn't notice. So how we attached ours was we wiggled the ends, and then we used those like pipe clips. They're like PVC.
Yep.
And we just put those on, and I think every other. Yeah. So I didn't notice major lengthwise.
Shade.
These were 30.
Okay.
And that's because that's what we already had. If I were buying for retail, maybe I would have done 50, but because we had the 30, it worked. Here's just another picture. And then we also used our tunnels for events. So one thing that we did this year is, you can see that's our high tunnel, and we had this green space here, is we intentionally built a caterpillar, or put up a caterpillar tunnel in the green space to specifically host our dinners. Because in the past, we were hosting in the green space, but there was no good shade. And when you have a dinner in August, you know it's going to be hot. And so we'd be like, oh, but we told the guests it's a farm dinner, expect to be hot. But then you're like, this is miserable. So we just put up the shade structure specifically to host these farm to table dinners, and it went great. It was wonderful. So you can see in our farm to table dinners, we'd serve 40 people. So this was Chef Grant Gillen. He was the master chef a few seasons ago, great guy. He lives in Altoona. But yeah, we do 4 to 5 dinners a year, all with local chefs, and they're wonderful. Tickets this season were $150 each, and we sold out like within days of launching. So good money maker.
How'd you split the money with the chef?
So chef, we just flat feed. We paid him $150, him or her. Sorry, not 150. $850. No. Nope. I take it all back. No. So every chef got $850, and then we covered all the costs of the food. And their job is just show up, prepare the meal, because we have a commercial kitchen, make your meal, serve it. We provided all the staff. We own the tables, the chairs, all the dinnerware. So we invested in that because we knew that was a key thing we were going to dive into in our business. You could rent it all as well if you just want to experiment. Okay, and then we have our greenhouse. So this is actually like across the street from where our Airbnb and like where we host the farm to table dinner. So we have 2 of these tunnels, and they're from Tunnel Vision Hoop again. They're 88 by 30, and that size was just based on the size of our parking lot and our space. That's what we could fit. We would have gone bigger if we had the space, but 4-foot bow. They're both heated. I say they're over-engineered because we had a lot of requirements by our county in order to like check all their boxes. So we joke that like the footings on these greenhouses are deeper than the footings of this building that we built at the same time. So it costs us a lot more money than ideal, but these structures are not going anywhere. Probably gonna lose this guy in a tornado versus these. So, and then we kind of did all the fancy things. So shin wall, the automatic roll-up sides, double poly. They're really nice greenhouses. We do have the automatic roll-up sides, but maybe it's because I'm a control freak, I still control them. So I don't have it set to a certain temperature or wind or anything. It's still me pressing the button up or down. So, and that's just because I have this like paranoia of, oh, the sun came out, they want to roll up, but maybe there's like something near the plastic that's going to rip it as it's rolling up. And so I get in my head. So I could easily change that, but that's where it's at. Okay, so key thing we use the greenhouses for are retail, which is the garden center. Let me just dive in. Here's just some photos of the inside. Shelly and Stephanie were my two kind of key rockstar employees. During the greenhouse season, I'd have up to 8 employees, not all full-time. Stephanie was always full-time, and then I had Shelly was there about 3 days a week. But we were pretty efficient labor-wise, but most of the employees' jobs were retail. Because the back-end stuff, to me, isn't, we can knock that out. It's the selling and so on that we hired people for. Last year, we installed overhead irrigation for our hanging baskets. And this past season, we really bumped up the hanging baskets because there's definitely a demand for that in our area. So early winter tip, when you start in February, you have big greenhouses and you don't necessarily want to heat the whole thing. So we would basically split it in half or whatever the space we did need. And so we'd just add excess plastic. So the heater would be like where I am. And so we're not heating the whole place. We're just heating that small area. So when plugs do start to get delivered, or when you start your hot peppers or whatever, you just have a smaller environment that you're spending money on to heat. And then we also use this gap and crack filler. Like our shin wall, where it touched the concrete, it wasn't sure, there was some air coming through. So we would just put that anywhere that there wasn't, where air could get in or out, just to try to tighten up the structure. Wrong way. So we have one side where we're trying to make it smaller, and then the other kind of thing that worked well for us was creating shade in your garden center. One, for shade plants, because it's more obvious for customers, like, where are the shade plants? Oh, they're under the shade cloth. So, and it helps them thrive more. We also put shade over our checkout counter, where our customers would be standing and where our employees would be working. So real simple task. So we did that on the inside of the tunnel. This year, we didn't put any shade on the outside of the tunnel. We didn't have to, which was surprising. The years in last year, we did put shade over the whole tunnel when it got too hot. Just a few pictures. Okay, and then greenhouse events. These were probably the most fun things that we did. So this is using the greenhouse to host events. This picture here was a picture of Flannel Fest. We also did dinners in there, and then Doug Unplugged, which were concerts. So key perk of the events was it forced us to clear out the greenhouse and get all the tables, all the cinder blocks, everything out, which then we could deep clean it, which huge pain in the butt, right? Moving tables, cinder blocks, and all that. But it allowed us to deep clean, sweep, get all the debris out so that we're starting at a clean slate each season. Because if I didn't have to do this, I wouldn't. And then you may have pests, disease, so on, build up. So this is one perk of using the tunnel for events. Okay, so Flannel Fest was like a local market. So we had vendors, makers, bakers, producers. This season we had 60 vendors. And so we had vendors in each of our tunnels and then also across the street in our high tunnel. And there was a vendor fee, so we make money off the vendor fee. We also had a food truck. And while this was going on, our farm store was open as well too. So we made money on the vendor fee, but then we also had more people at the farm that would then come to our farm store. So we made more profit on the sales of our stuff as well. So the past 2 seasons, that's how long we've done it. We always hosted the last weekend of September. It was actually 10 to 3 this year. That's a typo. And like I said, we used all of our covered spaces. Both years we've hosted it, it's been miserably hot, unfortunately. So in hindsight, I should have pushed it maybe to early October, but like life events happened and I couldn't. But I think it was like at least 90 degrees each time in a greenhouse, and like I've got an ice cream vendor in there. So yeah, the flannel was tied around your waist, but the idea was great. So, just something you have to consider. We did have shade cloth on one of our tunnels. We did what we could, but unfortunately it was hotter than ideal. And so each vendor, we created like social media graphics that they would share so that their clientele, their customers would know about the event to help blow it up and get more people there. We even like had it spill outside of the greenhouse because, everybody loves to see a VW bus as they're driving by. So it had good curb appeal. This is just an example of one vendor setup. So we had vintage clothing, we had food, we had jewelry, all the things. And we had a wait list. Like people wanted to come be a part of it. Okay, another thing we did are the farm-to-table dinners. The reason it's called farm stand to fork, because we had the Dogpatch farm stand, and the farm stand, here's a picture of our kitchen. So the kitchen was across the street, and this was like a shotgun dinner. This was like a mid-October last year. We were like, hey, let's do another dinner. And so we had Chef Brett from the Cheese Bar, who him and I went to high school together. So I'm like, hey, Brett, you want to do a dinner? He's like, yeah, that sounds great. So it worked out perfectly. And I was like, okay, so Brett, here's the deal. You're going to be in the kitchen. We have to go across the street to take the food to the table. So like, simplify it, you know? He's like, yeah, got it. 7 courses on his menu, which typically we do 4 to 5. So I think he's still laughing about that one. So the kind of big takeaway we got from this is like, if you have to transport finely plated food across the street over a gravel road and all that, it's not ideal. Okay? So I'll show you what we did to kind of change that. So this was like a live and learn dinner. It was all great. The guests had no idea, but we ended up calling our neighbors and be like, hey, can you help? Because we couldn't get the food to people fast enough, us running back and forth. But you can see we had white tablecloth. We just did it down the center of the greenhouse. We actually left our 3-tier shelves because we didn't feel like we needed to move those. It was not in anyone's way. And then we had the supplemental heaters and nice fall decor. Okay, you know what? Yeah, I'm gonna go this. So then the next event we hosted was Doug Unplugged, which my husband is a former touring musician. He's in the music world, so this was something that excited him. If that wasn't his gig, I don't think I ever would have hosted these, but we would get local bands to play, and then people would buy a ticket in order to come. So these were tons of fun, not our biggest money maker. I think there was that fine line of like, how much can we pay the band versus how much can we have someone spend on a ticket? And we could have deep dove into that more, but we were kind of like, let's not go so far into the concert realm. But every time we'd do a show, we'd have a fun backdrop and we'd have supplemental lighting, and it was always great. Just kind of give you a picture of like the setup with chairs, heat, so on. The musicians always had a blast too. Question? No. So we're actually in the county, and I don't want to say lawless, but we were fine. Okay, and then finally we did a dinner and a concert, right? Why not? Like, let's just do it all together. Oops. But speaking of being lawless, don't do this, but we moved our commercial kitchen to the backside of our greenhouse because we didn't want to walk across the street in December with plates. So this was the most fun event we ever hosted. We had a Christmas theme. We had the band called the River City Opry, and the kitchen was just behind the shade cloth right there. So this was our best event, most profitable. We had like 60 guests attend. Okay, I know my time's almost up. These are the key things to think about if you want to host events. This isn't all-inclusive, but you want to make your space inviting because you're going from a place where you're growing plants to like where people want to be cozy and hang out. So make sure it's inviting. Always have backup heat because we always hosted events in the winter when we're not using the greenhouse. You're not going to do it in spring. So expect it to be freezing. Expect your heater not to maybe keep up with everyone, especially on cement floors. So always have supplemental heat. Same with lighting. Have a bathroom, whether you have to bring in a porta potty or whatever, but you need a place for people to go to the bathroom. Make sure it's stocked. Have enough staff. How do you sell tickets? Are you going to have booze? Are people going to bring it? Have a game plan there. Plan for parking and insurance. All those things are things you have to think about if you want to actually host an event. And then the last one, think about your planning and zoning. You may want to host an event and you can't even do it based on your county because every county is different. So if events are something on your brain, start here and then build out from there. Okay, I'm done. There. Thank you. Any questions? I know everyone wants to eat, so I don't want to stop you from that. Yeah. Okay, all right. Ask away. Yes.
So I was just in a meeting yesterday with some other like-minded farmers, and we were talking about diversification versus a 3-ring circuit.
Okay, fair.
you're a farmer,
Mhm.
maybe.
Yep. I feel like I got away from being a farmer, to be honest with you.
So my question is, like, if it, like, turn from being a farmer to being a touring circus or a event planner or whatever, like, what's the thing that, like, ultimately was like, I'm losing
Mhm.
my mind and my family and my whatever.
Yeah.
Is there-
Okay, a couple things there. So I have bad knees. I just had a knee surgery recently, and I physically was having a hard time farming. And so the writing on the end of the wall for me was like, my body's not going to be able to maintain this. Not getting younger. I know I'm not old, okay, don't get me wrong, but like and my farming was very intensive, urban, I'm not using tractors or so on. So that was a big thing for me is like, how can my body maintain this? And I couldn't. And so then we're like, oh, a garden center is great because you're upright, and you're not, but it's still labor intensive, And I actually really, truly love the garden center route. But like, as things evolved, I'm like, I have these salad dressings. I don't make them. I get orders from Hy-Vee. I send the order to my co-packer. My co-packer makes them. Hy-Vee picks it up from them, and I get paid. And I was like, it's kind of nice. So a lot of it was financial and my body. I don't know if that totally answers your question, but that's where I was at. But yes, it can, and that's we kind of spiraled into doing all the things, and then like, whoa, can't do all the things. What do we need to focus on? And now for me, my focus is the dressings, some content, some homestead, and then more time with my family. Yep.
Jenny, for your seedlings or the transplants which you are selling,
Mhm.
are there any specific vegetable or crop, what plant are people looking for in the spring when they come?
It's specific to vegetables.
Yeah.
Definitely tomatoes. And we grew unique. So we had unique varieties, because if you're buying like a burpee plant from somewhere, so we started everything from seed. So we would do seeds that you can't just get everywhere. And then things like we did 6-packs. So we do like herb packs or lettuce packs and just kind of like different things that you couldn't get everywhere seem to kind of excite customers, or like salad bowls that have 4 plugs of Salanova and they grow them over time. So more unique varieties. Yeah.
With your retail center, were you primarily selling things that you were growing, or were you also selling things that other farmers were growing?
But so like in our store. So she's asking about our farm stand. Were we selling only our stuff or other stuff? And it was both. So and as the years went on, it was actually more of other people's stuff rather than ours. So we'd have eggs, we'd have meats, we'd have beverages, cheeses. So it was kind of like a diversified grocery store. Yep.
So, not to bring up a sore subject, but
Bring it.
your zone commercial, I know.
At the greenhouses we are.
Right.
Yes.
Can you talk about what you did to cause to be rezoned from agriculture to commercial?
Okay, so when we bought, let me just get a visual here.
I think it's valuable for people to understand.
Yes.
that.
So this property here, this parking lot, we bought this from a church across the street. It was actually zoned institutional. So when we purchased it, we went to the county and presented them a site plan and said, here's what we're going to do. Can we get this rezoned? Now, we had worked with the county in the past because our other property was a cluster and we had lots of issues. We knew how to navigate the county better with this property. We went in with a professional site plan and an attorney and were able to get this rezoned. The other property, when we bought the other property, which had the house, which we put the farm stand on, which we put the high tunnel on, it's residential. It still is residential. Through a lot of work, we're able to get a conditional use permit. And the conditional use permit allows us to run a business on a residentially zoned property. It was a big headache for us for multiple reasons, but one of the main reasons was we didn't know how to navigate working with the county. Over time, we figured it out. We now know like the importance of a site plan, which can cost over $10,000. So if you're just like hoping that this works and you're gonna hire someone for those costs, like it's tough, as a beginning farmer. But I think it's just important to have a relationship with your planning and zoning. Mm-hmm.
If you tried to do all these events and still zoned as residential or agricultural, do you think you would have gotten grief from anybody?
Good question. I mean, there's the whole question of like, do you ask for forgiveness? We were too much on their radar to be able to pull it off. in a different area, in a different situation? I don't know. And like all counties are different. So if we were in the city of Des Moines, our regulations would be different, which is literally across the street from where we are.
Yeah, no, when we're working on high tunnel stuff, there's a lot of they're letting you get away with certain things because these are temporary structures that aren't gathering spaces.
Yep.
And when you start having people, you're inviting them in, I'm curious if
Yeah, then it's a different beast.
zoning issues.
It's a real thing. It definitely is. Yep. Any other questions? Yeah.
Examples of native perennials that you pulled from the-
So I worked with a company called Allen Dan Seed Company, and they're in Winterset. And they started all of our plants. And so they delivered to us in the gallons. And so, you have your common milkweeds were really popular. Of course, I'm drawing a blank right now of like natives. Help me out, people. What are good natives?
You do a lot of grasses.
Kind of. Grasses actually weren't huge sellers for us in general in the garden center too. Coneflowers, yes, for sure. I'm so sorry. I'm just drawing a big blank right now with different natives. Prairie seed drop, is that one? That one went well for us. It's grass. Blazing star a little bit, the meadow blazing star. Yeah, milk. We had like tons of different varieties of milkweed, and people just recognize that. So that's like, oh, I want that. I can even look back at my notes if you email me if you really want. I'm sorry, I just don't have specifics off the top of my head right now. Oh yeah, totally. And basically, when I worked with them, I was like, "What do you recommend?" And they said this, and because they gave me like 20 different varieties, and they knew like how much of each. Because when it was a first time for us, I was like, I don't know. So now like we have good data there that we could build off of. That's a great point. Yep. So we got some plugs for them, but most we had in finished gallon containers.
Plug cell.
We put the plugs in quarts, and the gallons sold better. Yep.
But were you growing those gallons? Did you hang on to that gallon for like a year?
No. So with the natives, I purposely got them finished in gallons, and they were delivered mid-May. So it was like, give it to me, sell it, be done. Yep.
Did Alan Dan give you recommendations on the vegetable side too, or just on those like natives?
Nope. Just they were only for natives for me.
Did you have any consultation with anybody on, like, you're walking into a greenhouse business? What varieties are we doing? How much should we have? Or,
Yeah.
Or are we just spitballing all that?
He's asking about how do you know what to grow. So like when it came to the fruit and veg, we focused on things that I knew that I could speak to. So like, hey, this is a broccoli I grow at my home plot, and I absolutely love it. So it was kind of like just my experience. And then when it came to the plugs and the annuals and those sorts of things, I relied on my rep. So I had a rep at Ball Seed, and I was like, here's what I'm looking for. I don't want all the pink petunias that everyone has. What are some funky things? But also what are things that sell? So I relied heavily on my rep to get us going. And then I know like, oh, next year I would need more lantana because that sold fast. You have to start somewhere and then build from that. I feel like they're almost ready back there. Any other questions?
Questions? Thank Jenny.
Thank you.